Guys, we'll just give it one more minute and then we will get started. Alrighty, guys, we will go ahead and get started. So I'm Shannon Toohey. I am the program director at the University of California, Irvine. And we're gonna have a few other faculty from UC Irvine join us that I'll introduce in a minute. First, I just kind of wanted to give you a brief rundown of what we're gonna talk about tonight. We kind of wanted to address what some of our fellowship opportunities are, both for anyone interested, as well as, and give an opportunity to answer questions, as well as for medical students who are applying to residency, kind of address why do fellowships matter for your training. And the biggest thing for that is it brings additional resources that may not be available otherwise. So if you go to a program that has a medical education fellowship, now you've got new fellows that have a ton of energy, a bunch of free time that is like supposed to be dedicated to learning how to do medical education. So the residency is going to benefit from that. If you have an international medicine fellowship, you're probably going to have more opportunities to travel. So things like that. So all of these things will factor a little bit into your education as a resident. So we will go through in a moment what our fellowships are and how those kind of impact you guys. I'll let some of the fellowship directors give brief overviews of their fellowships. Not everyone could make it today. It's a little hard to nail down. We've got about 10 different fellowship directors, so it's a little hard to nail down everyone at the same time. So I'll give brief overviews of the ones that people couldn't make it. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to like jump in and ask a question or just throw it in the chat box and I'll keep moderating that and we can answer your questions as we go. This is kind of for you guys, so we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So any questions about that from the get-go? Alrighty. So right now, so far on the call, we have Warren Weekman, who is one of our directors for medical education and technology, or medical design, multimedia design and technology. And then we've got Dr. Osborne, who is one of the fellow faculty for that as well. She's also our vice chair for education. So in a moment, she will give kind of a general overview of her thoughts on fellowships and what we offer. We also have Dr. Eric McCoy here, who is our simulation fellowship director. And I'm hoping we're gonna have one or two more join us as the evening goes on, and if not, I'll kind of give you guys an overview of those. Megan, are you set, or do you want Warren to give an overview of MedEdTech first?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Such a Zoom line just then. But my computer popped up and said your mic isn't working. So it was a legitimate. Can you hear me?
That's a legitimate concern.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm sorry that I am not camera ready right now. It was quite an afternoon. So I'm going to stay off camera right now. But I will be happy to see all of you in person at some point in the future. But it's really, really nice to meet all of you. Thank you for being here. I'm going to just share my screen, Dr. Toohey. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to switch. Thank you. Thank you. And here is my screen. So I want to talk to you a little bit about fellowships and why would you do a fellowship? Why would you want to do a fellowship here? And so fellowship is after residency. Obviously, you guys are medical students now, and then you'll become residents, and then fellowship would be after that. Fellowships are usually anywhere between 1 and 3 years, and they give you a specialty area of expertise, especially if you are interested in becoming an academic faculty member. It's pretty well expected that you would do a fellowship. Now, there are some 4-year programs, some 4-year residency programs who will say that they'll do kind of like mini fellowships during the 4 years. I personally am a fan of the 3+1 model, where you do 3 years of residency and then you take that extra year to really do a full fellowship and sink your teeth in get to know that specialty really well, or, 1 or 2 years after that. We have a number of fellowships here at UCI. We have clinical informatics, multimedia design and educational technology, research and population health, simulation, ultrasound, and wilderness. And there's lots and lots of other fellowships out there. There's things like cardiac medicine and critical care and peds and toxicology, and SAEM and EMRA have very nice websites which discuss all the different types of specialties. And do you have to go into academics if you do a fellowship? Absolutely not. There's things like clinical informatics and administration, which are really beneficial if you do want to do community practice and you want to be something like a medical director or a chief information hospital or officer for a hospital system. So these are the fellowships we have here. We are also potentially expanding our fellowships. We may at some point at some point in the near future, incorporate an administration fellowship. And we also are planning a pediatric emergency medicine fellowship as well. But fellowship is a fun year or two. It's nice because you're making more money than you are as a resident, but you don't quite have the taste of the attending life yet, so you won't miss the money that you're making as an attending. You work fewer hours than you did in residency. You actually work fewer hours than you will as an attending, because you want to have dedicated education time so that you can really get to know the niche that you are interested in. And I'd love to hear your questions, but first we'll talk about each one individually. But if you have any general questions, we can open it up in a couple minutes. But I think fellowship is a good option if you want to keep your options open for academics versus community, if you want to have an added niche, and if maybe there's something that you really want to be an expert in, like wilderness, because it's something that you're going to do in your spare time and become a speaker at ASAP on wilderness topics or simulation topics. So with that being said, are there any questions right now before we kind of move into each of the individual types of fellowships? You're welcome to put them in the chat box or shout them out.
Yeah, I have a question. My name's Alec.
Hi, Alec.
Medical student. Hello. So my question is did any of these fellowships arise from like specific resident interests throughout? And is that how this, your pediatric one is coming about too, due to like spearheaded by these residents?
Great question. So Dr. Tui can speak to that. And she can tell you actually that the multimedia design and educational technology was something that she and Dr. Weekman created when she was a resident, and has since launched her career as a rock star educator in this world. And then I also do want to mention quickly too, is that there are ACGME fellowships and there's non-ACGME fellowships. So like the pediatrics one is an ACGME fellowship. And so that takes a little bit of a more rigorous application process. And then there's there are some regulations while you're a fellow, like for example, like on moonlighting and things like that. But it is nice that it's certified by the ACGME. But at the end of the day, like I don't think, unless you are interested in that topic area, obviously if you're interested in peds, you have to do an ACGME certified fellowship. But at the end of the day, I think in emergency medicine at this point in time, it doesn't really matter whether you've done an ACGME fellowship or a non-ACGME fellowship. If you want to go into academics, I think it's just that you've done a fellowship. So Dr. Tui, did you want to talk about how
so I agree with Megan. Most EM fellowships at this point are non-ACGME. It gives more flexibility. There's less, it's kind of like the difference between public school and like a charter school. You just have a lot more options as opposed to someone being like, here is exactly what you must do. So most of the EM tends to be non-ACGME. There's only a few that are ACGME, clinical informatics, TOPS, and PEDS. I think are
EMS.
EMS now. That's right. EMS. Got it.
And there's a couple more. Hyperbarics.
Anyway, so when I was a third-year resident, I knew I wanted to do fellowship. I knew I wanted to stay in academics, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I wanted something in the education realm, but every fellowship I was looking at wasn't quite hitting it. It was more, they were all more classical education. They all got PEs, and that wasn't quite what I wanted. And I was on a night shift with Dr. Weekman, who's going to talk about the MedTech fellowship in a moment. And he was like, I was thinking about making this fellowship, and it focused on modern educational techniques. It focused on multimedia design. It focused on actual instructional design. And I was like, that's what I want. I didn't want 10 years ago education, which is what a lot of the fellowships at the time were. I wanted future stuff, what we were going to do in the future, working on TBLs. So they actually built out my fellowship for me. So I was the first fellow in it. They created an entire curriculum for me. We figured out what my master's was going to be in. I did a 2-year fellowship. One of my colleagues followed behind me, and now we're on our 7th fellow.
I had to do the math in my head. I was like, 7 maybe? I think we're at 7. Yeah.
That's crazy. So we're on our 7th fellow now that we're working through, that just started. So it's a great program. But yes, that one they built out specifically for me. Others have kind of come up out of faculty interest. So we have faculty who are very dedicated in research. They want to be able to help the future kind of learn how to do that better. So we have a research fellowship. The wilderness one, we have several faculty members who are very, very interested in wilderness. So they wanted to create that one. Same thing with simulation. So it kind of varies. So sometimes it's faculty interest, but the MetaTech one, they definitely built out specifically for me. So on that note, Dub, would you like to talk more about the MetaTech Fellowship?
Sure thing. So hi, everyone. My name is Warren Weekman, or Dub, as many people call me. So I am one of the co-directors for the Multimedia Design, Education, and Technology Fellowship. Dr. Osborne is the other co-director of the fellowship. And as Dr. Tui was saying, she was our very first fellow. And we were toying this idea around as far as education and technology, but really didn't have a good way to put it together. And then once, Shannon and I started talking more about it, we felt like this would be the perfect project for us to put together as her first fellowship project, i.e. building the fellowship. And since then, we've really evolved it into kind of taking what a quote classical education fellowship is, which in emergency medicine, they're becoming a lot more popular. I think of all the different specialties, emergency medicine definitely has a large proportion of fellowships, but we also seemingly have a larger proportion of education fellowships as we are kind of pushing the boundaries of what traditional education looks like. For us, a lot of the education fellowships are sort of centered around a master's in education. And at times there are certain fellowships that really just focus on getting the master's and giving a couple projects that relate specifically to that master's, which oftentimes can be very theory-based. In putting together our version of the fellowship, we really wanted to sort of future-proof what you could do as an educator, thinking about how is, resident education done today? How is medical student education done today? But more importantly, how is it going to be done in 2 to 3 years? It's really apparent right now. I mean, as we're doing this all via Zoom, and as many of you are doing structured didactics and everything in your life is Zoom based, this really threw a whole bunch of people for a loop and a lot of educators for a loop. But fortunately, we've been talking about innovative ways to use distance learning and distance teaching through the fellowship. So we focus a lot on kind of these newer technologies. Shannon actually in progressing through her fellowship also got very interested on the technology side, and we've now been piloting different projects such as an augmented reality kind of simulation project, looking at whether augmented reality can be as effective for simulation as kind of traditional simulation in a high fidelity simulation center. We've also played with things like virtual reality and 3D printing, in addition just to content creation and all sorts of other techniques out there. So as we said, we're on our 7th fellow right now. Naturally, being in education, it sort of guides everyone into an academics career. And so Dr. Tui is one of our alumni from our fellowship program, and she's our program director. Dr. Ray, who's our associate program director, is also from our fellowship. Dr. Paradise, she's on the East Coast of North Carolina. She is their fellowship director for education on that side. We have faculty that have, or fellows that have graduated that are academic faculty at places like the VA. Dr. Sidario, one of our most recent faculty, or fellows who have graduated, also was able to stay with us here at UCI, but he's really focusing his efforts on outreach and diversity education, which is really kind of an interesting niche within the education market. And then we have two current fellows. one who's focusing very heavily on gamification. And pretty much he has been running a large proportion of our conferences in converting, simple concept lectures into really elaborate games, from scavenger hunts to card-based games to QR code games. So really cool stuff. And then our brand new fellow who's been here for, gosh, about a month or so, he's still just getting his feet wet and trying to find his home. But yeah, it's a super fun area that we get a chance to play a lot in, both on the residency side and on the medical student side.
Awesome. Thank you, Warren. Any questions about that? Either jump in or throw them in the chat. So when you guys, those of you who are students, because I'm not sure how many of you guys are students versus residents, having an education fellowship, like I said before, is really valuable when you're picking a program, just because every year we usually have one in each year, a first year fellow and a second year fellow, who like comes in and they're super enthusiastic. They really want to teach. They have all these new ideas that we like coming up with new ideas. Warren, Megan, Elise and I still like playing. We come up with new card games and different things, but to have completely new blood coming in makes a huge difference in your education. And so one of our education fellows usually makes like these huge elaborate games at least once a month, which I wouldn't necessarily have time to do every single month because it takes a lot of time. So it would maybe be every other month if it was just me, or if it was just our team. But once you add other fellows into it, and then clinically as well, all of the fellows really contribute, because while having faculty who have 10 years of experience is absolutely essential, and I think that's where the majority of your education should come from, having new different clinical perspectives and having people that have trained somewhere else or are younger or have a different clinical practice coming in every year or two is really going to impact your clinical education, because they've got different ideas. They're a little bit more enthusiastic. They may have trained a slightly different way. And it really adds to your education in experiences and seeing other perspectives. So I think we also have Dr. McCoy here. Dr. McCoy, would you like to chat about the simulation fellowship?
Testing 1 2, microphone check, microphone check. Can you guys hear me? Yep. Awesome. All right, Eric McCoy, the ED attendings here, working with our awesome staff. I'd say that probably our first passion, if you guys haven't got this already, is education. So I'm the director of our simulation fellowship here at UC Irvine, both the domestic and the international fellowship program. And similar to the other education programs, it's kind of diverse. In fact, we've done cross-pollination with research as well as med ed tech. For instance, one of our recent studies we did looking at the feasibility of using wearable technology to put on an international telesim course on mass casualty incident simulations. So I just knocked on the door, a couple doors down from my office, Dr. Weekman, dubs, and like, hey man, we're about to do this MCI, mass casualty incident active shooter scenario, and we're doing research on simulation using technology. Oh, great. He has a box of Google Glass that we can get access to. So really it's all in education, spanning across all the domains. So in our fellowship, there's curriculum design, development, implementation, and we're focusing on the practical application of the previous knowledge gained, either in the book, in class, but we're actually looking at the practical application. And so roughly every month, we're here with our awesome faculty, Dr. Tu. I just saw her earlier today doing interviews and doing sims. We're there doing sim with the med ed tech group. And so there's research, curriculum design, development. When I say research, man, that tightens people's sphincter up for some odd reason. And that's just most healthcare providers in general. I'd say most of our fellows are 85% education, like 15% research, but we implement research study designs. And so I do research both here at UC Irvine, but also collaborative research with multiple institutions in North America. So for SIM, I'd say their ASEP or their SAEM conference is the International Meeting on SIM in Healthcare. Can you guys hear me okay? And so at this conference, we put on a whole lot of educational content, whether it be workshops in developing SIM curriculum, workshops in doing SIM research, curriculum design development, or even workshops on how to build kind of simulation research protocols. Disclaimer, I'm an instructor for clinical epi and biostats at the School of Medicine, and I also fly overseas every year to teach EBM at McMaster University. So there's a lot of overtones of evidence-based medicine and research integrated into the educational aspect. So not only are we asking, hey, is this a kind of an interesting idea? we're also asking, how do we quantify, how do we test this idea in a research question? And so in a nutshell, that's what we do. It's a lot of curriculum design, development, implementation, and a lot of collaboration with providers, simulation experts, and from around the world via our contacts through the International Meeting on Sim Healthcare and the Society for Sim in Education. So it's really about actually kind of doing as opposed to just simply understanding. Some of our previous fellows, I think I'm losing out on you guys here. Some of our previous fellows have gone on either to 1 or 2 year fellowships, similar to our other fellowships, typically the 2-year fellowship track. Those are fellows who are heavily interested in academics or leadership in that regard. So our fellows have gone off to be either program directors or SIM directors, or some of them right out of fellowship have gone on to be the SIM director for entire hospitals. Some of our international fellows have gone on to be directors of quite possibly some of the largest SIM centers in the world. Overseas. And so SIM is a ridiculously rapidly growing niche within medicine just in general, not just emergency medicine. The amount of assets that are getting poured into SIM and the amount of interest is growing at a much larger rate than the human capital, meaning that there are a lot more institutions now having already invested in SIM infrastructure that don't currently have anybody who's formally trained in the SIM theory, SIM implementation, which is a tweak on traditional educational methods. And so in some instances, some of my fellows are leaving their fellowship and getting into a position that it would typically take 10 to 15 years to get into by virtue of their experience, the contacts, and our amazing faculty here. If you kind of look at the distribution of knowledge base and skill set here in our department, it is just ridiculous. Like there's a large amount of our faculty who are deans in the School of Medicine. In fact, some of them are talking to you guys tonight. So it's truly a privilege both from a faculty perspective, but moreover, a medical student and a resident perspective to see how heavily our faculty are invested in education. It's just mind-boggling with regards to the amount of weight that our department holds in the School of Medicine, but just in academics, in education in general. And it's a pleasure to work with every single one of them. I feel privileged to work here, and I've been here like for 15 years, and I still feel lucky every single day. It's awesome. Love you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy. And then, as I said, just like education for simulation, because we have simulation fellows, we have new sim fellows that are constantly making new cases, looking into new ways to improve simulation. We do simulation once a month for the residency. And then they also tend to teach for the medical school, which opens up opportunities for our residents to teach for the medical school. So lots of opportunities there. Any questions for Dr. McCoy in the simulation fellowship? Alrighty, I think we also have Dr. Al-Ghazi here. Isabel, did you want to chat at all about the Wilderness Fellowship?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm not the greatest advertiser, but okay, let's start over again. I am the Wilderness Medicine Fellowship Director. This fellowship started 1 year ago. We just graduated our first fellow. A little bit of me, I did a fellowship in Boston for 2 years, and then came to UCI with the dream of like starting my own. Wilderness Medicine is a non-ACGME. It's pretty new subspecialty of emergency medicine, and is developing very rapidly right now. It's a very cool little niche. We treat altitude medicine, dive medicine, travel medicine. We offer everything from the diploma in diving, diploma in mountain medicine. We offer our fellows to go to Nepal to work with the Himalayan Rescue Association and Everest Base Camp. We also offer them to go and work with the DAN, the Divers Network. You also have opportunities to go work with London School of Tropical Medicine. The opportunities are endless. This fellow, who is the first fellow who graduated this year, she is actually gonna go work in the Amazon. She's gonna be the medical director in a NGO clinic in Iquitos, Peru, which I think is amazing. I told her that if she didn't take the job, I would take it. We're starting to create a lot more curriculum and activities for the medical students. There's actually a wilderness medicine interest group that we do a conference every year in San Bernardino. We camp and we teach wilderness medicine for a whole 2 days. We also have partnerships with UC San Diego, Kaiser, and the Navy. We actually do a wilderness race every May with them, which is really cool. We do all sorts of sim, and we're looking to do a lot more other activities. Our faculty that is related to wilderness medicine is me, who I'm formally trained. There's Sangeeta Sakaria, who has both the diploma in mountain medicine and dive medicine. There is Robert Katzer, who is EMS board certified, and he gives all the EMS portion of wilderness medicine. And then we also collaborate with Dr. Sushard, who is a toxicologist, and Dr. Burns, who is a specialist in ID. So I think that what we're doing is really cool. Our fellow this year, with COVID, there's a lot of opportunities are being on hold right now, but she's working on 3 projects already, with simulation and with the national parks. So yeah, if you have any questions, you can send me an email to ialga.c as in C, Ray as in Echo G, at uci.edu, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Isabel. Any questions for her right now, guys? And I'll put her email in the chat as well.
Perfect.
All right, thanks, Isabel. All right, guys. And so Wilderness is a really cool fellowship. It's a lot of fun. But also because of all those opportunities that are available to fellows, because they're creating things like she said, the wilderness race that we do. Again, additional opportunities for residents, because you can either get to partake in those as an educational opportunity, or if you're interested, you can do research under them or look into some of the same opportunities that the fellows get to participate in. The last couple of fellowships we have clinical informatics. So as stated before, that's one of the ACGME approved ones. So ours is actually not EM specific. So they're on their 3rd fellow now. 2 of them have been EM and 1 of them was pathology. So clinical informatics, it's kind of the administrative side of EMRs. So pulling data from it, improving flow, things like that. So it's a 2-year fellowship. So for that, it's a lot of administrative stuff as far as affecting the residents. There's research opportunities with that fellow. Fellows have a little bit more time than faculty. They can put a little bit more, one-on-one, not that we don't. We've got 20 faculty, 27 residents. We have a lot of one-on-one time, but sometimes fellows just have a little more free time than the faculty do, or a little fewer projects, so their attention's a little less divided. So some more opportunities there. Research, same thing. So we have a research fellowship where most of them do 2 years and get a master's in public health for the most part. So that one, many more opportunities for doing research, additional projects, grant writing, training, things like that. That kind of trickles down to the residents. And then last, but definitely not least, would be ultrasound. So if you guys don't know, Dr. Fox is our chair, but he's also the director of our ultrasound fellowship. And he is kind of a guru in ultrasound. He's very well known nationally. He loves ultrasound. So that is a 1-year fellowship in general. They do all the QAs where they're checking on all of our recorded ultrasounds. They're doing teaching in the department, and then they do all of the teaching for the residents. So every single month, so we have an intern orientation that's an 8-hour day that's all focused on ultrasound, learning how to do it, learning the pathology. And then we also have monthly during our simulation, every resident goes through another hour of learning how to do ultrasounds with actual models, like real person models, as well as the pathology models that we have, going through some of the pathology slides, what things should look like if they're not normal. So again, like really just a nice opportunity for residents where that education is kind of trickling down. And then as Megan said, there's a very good chance that in the near future, we're gonna start an administration fellowship, which would be more the actual administration of a department. So more working with the hospitals, doing some of the medical directorship stuff, running the general operations, which again will open up even more opportunities because if a fellow's going to those meetings, there's more opportunities for residents to attend and kind of have someone to kind of not handhold, but be like, this is what's going on. Whereas the chair, if you wanted to go, there's lots of meetings you probably could go to. I went to a lot of, there was a bunch of QI on how to run Code Blues that I chose to go to as a resident because it was an issue and I wanted to address it. So there's lots of opportunities to do operation stuff like that, but it opens up a little bit more when there's a formalized fellowship.
Shannon, I was way back in the day, I was one of Chris Fox's ultrasound fellows, so I could always speak to the ultrasound fellowship from way back.
I forget that, Dub. How do I always forget you're ultrasound trained?
I know. And technically, which it's a fun fact I don't think very many people know, I'm actually board certified in informatics, and so I'm listed as one of the faculty.
That's right. I should let you do this.
I've done a lot of stuff since I've been here, to come to think about it.
He's the jack of all trades. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny with all these fellowships, it's really interesting to think about how they do play a really significant role in the residency education. I mean, as Shannon was saying, our ultrasound fellows are heavily involved with our resident teaching, and even now, so they're getting very heavily involved with our medical student teaching. We have a pretty robust medical student curriculum for ultrasound, and so there's a good portion of that training that's not just learning how to do the scans, but teaching and learning how to direct that skill set. And same thing with informatics. There's as more and more content and now telemedicine is becoming available, there's going to be more of a shift into teaching, especially on the medical student side. So there's always going to be a pretty strong education component of all of these fellowships, and that'll benefit you, I think, regardless of your, if you're a resident, if you're a fellow, or even a co-fellow, just kind of benefiting from that extra expertise that comes up.
Awesome. Perfect. So does anyone have, this one ran a little bit shorter than expected, but anyone have any questions about any of the fellowships in general, anything at all? And if not, that's okay.
Yeah, I wanted to briefly ask about the MedEd fellowship. How have you seen that kind of go down into the medical student realm? Do you guys, in the MedEd Tech one, do you guys teach the medical students, and do they end up teaching themselves as well? I know there'd be a lot of medical students that want to be involved in it.
Clinical education for third and fourth year for the medical school handle that.
Oh,
yeah, it's a pretty interesting setup when you look at kind of our faculty. I mean, Shannon's one of our faculty now. So as Dr. McCoy alluded to, many of us also have dean roles in the medical school. So one of my dean roles is I'm the associate dean for the clinical curriculum, so for the third and fourth year. And so for our fellows, they spend a good amount of time working with Shannon and Megan in putting together, and Elisa, putting together residency level content, but then they also spend a good amount of time putting together medical student content, usually through our clinical foundations or our doctoring course. So they get to spend a lot of time kind of in both domains, learning kind of the nuances of teaching residents, as well as teaching students, whether it's in small group or simulation or clinical skills or other type sessions. So it's a pretty good mix of both of those. And then also a lot of these kind of more technology-based projects of what we've done, we kind of benefit both. So we often use, EM as a testing ground for a lot of it. So whether it's, a sim day or conference day that we do for EM, we also have med students there, and so we can kind of pilot that out. So when we did, when Gabe Sidario, our just graduated fellow, we had just gotten a number of 3D printers, and we were building out 3D printed hand models to teach hand anatomy and hand pathology. So we put together this whole exercise of team-based learning with where they had a bag of pretty much all the carpal bones of the hand, and they had to recreate the hand and then put all the tendons together and then identify lesions that way that would match up. So it was a little bit of anatomy review as well as kind of functional anatomy and clinical stuff. And so we had teams of students and residents together. And then we kind of took that concept, and now we're trying to do more of those 3D printed exercises for teaching, med students, the basics of like C-spine anatomy and tying it to radiology imaging. So there's a lot of different play. And I think it's really helpful that you have, my side on the medical school side, as well as, Shannon, Elisa, and Megan on the residency side to get both aspects. Since oftentimes when people come into education or even come into fellowship, they might have an idea of what they want to do, but then they have that one project and they thought, wow, this is exactly kind of how I want to steer my career and go from there.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And what he kind of touched on this, but not quite, is we don't just have our hands in most of like the med school, it's like everything. So the dean of first and second years in faculty, he's not on med ed tech faculty, but he's ENAM faculty. Megan does admissions. Elisa is pretty much in charge of all of simulation and then all of like the standardized patients, as well as all the 4 years of clinical. So basically anything you could want to teach in medical school, you have an opportunity, and Elisa's always looking for teachers. And our residents do use it for elective hours. So a lot of our residents choose to do education for their elective and basically spend it teaching medical students, which is actually a really fun way to spend the time. And then you guys, of course, teach clinically when the students come through on their rotation for EM, but it's just additional opportunities there.
Cool. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Hello again, Alec. I just had a question regarding it's not exactly about fellowship, if that's okay, but it's during the resident education for ultrasound. Could you elaborate a little bit more? Like, are there like certain amount of scans residents are expected to get by the end of their 3 years? And just,
yeah, so that's actually pretty standardized. So ACGME, one of the milestones is regarding that, and it's 400 scans required, 500 scans recommended. Sorry, I had to think about that. So we track all those. So every time you guys do an ultrasound for quality assurance purposes, you have to put your name in, you put the patient's MRN, and every single week there's QA on that, and they actually auto log those for you guys. So it's the one procedure our residents don't have to log, which is nice. It minimizes paperwork. We have undergrads who work for Fox who do that. So all of our residents hit that. Most of our residents have hundreds over their minimum required. So in addition to the intern orientation and then monthly sim, we also have an EMS ultrasound 2-week block during which once COVID goes away, there are EMS ride-alongs. But right now, just because of social distancing, they're not letting other people do observer shifts in ambulances, which I get. It increases everyone's risk of COVID when you get another person in there. So we're hopefully when COVID dies down, that'll go. Right now, they're just doing more discussion-based stuff for EMS. And then the ultrasound component is additional ultrasound shifts where you just go and scan people in the department, as well as kind of work directly with the ultrasound fellows, the ultrasound faculty, and then go to QA. So you can see the quality improvement and see what they're assessing and what they're looking at and when things are wrong or they're interpreted wrong.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for elaborating on that.
Of course. Any other questions on anything I can answer for you guys?
I just had a quick question. You know, because, oh, hi, my name is Akash. So we all know that UCI is like ultrasound, you know, system and everything is pretty robust. So would you say that every resident that graduates feels comfortable enough to do the ultrasound, like enough to the level of a fellow? Because like, you know, when talking to residents, like a lot of them feel very comfortable that they don't want to pursue ultrasound fellowship, and instead it leaves room for other interests and stuff.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's been a couple of years since any of our residents have chosen to stay for ultrasound, and I think that's part of why, because they're so comfortable, and those are the ones that go through to the community. You know, they're very comfortable doing what they need to do as far as, you know, DVTs and gallbladders and other things that can kind of expedite patient care and improve flow. So I think a lot of our own, the last people who really stayed that were our own were more interested in the research side and the academic side, but the actual ultrasound side, I think our residents are so well trained that most of them wouldn't go just for that.
Thank you.
Of course, Kash. All right. Any other questions, guys?
I had one more quick one about, oh, go ahead. All right, about the MedEdTech, how have you seen it since you're on your 6th or 7th resident, you said? How have you seen it evolve since you were doing it? Like, are some technologies that back then that were kind of novel? Is there stuff now that we're doing all the time?
That are no longer novel? Oh, yeah. Stuff I made as a fellow we don't use anymore because it's a little ghetto now. But yeah, so we did more, I mean, obviously in-person games. And so we had card games and we had physical games and things like that. And of course, right now with COVID, those aren't really applicable. So it's kind of reapplying those, and TDLs as well. And so a lot of this year especially has been kind of reinventing those things and using Google Forms to reapply them online, or using other online media and making websites and things like that to apply the similar game that we would do in person to an online format. We've been doing a lot more. We used to do kind of, we call them scavenger or escape rooms, where they would go room to room solving puzzles on a particular topic, and then we would debrief. Those have kind of turned into small group settings where there's a PDF where they're working through a lot of the same puzzles, but it lacks the physical. And then as far as other technologies, you know, we didn't have the same AR kind of opportunities when I was a fellow that we do now, that we're kind of working through some of the kinks because technology is new, it's kind of a pain. We actually have 20 AR headsets loaded with simulation that we purchased for a grant that, you know, we own all of them. In the end, probably half of them are going to live with the med school and probably 8 of them will live up with us in City Tower for the residents. And it's just a matter of keeping up with the technology and actually utilizing it. But for the Med Tech Fellowship, I think it just depends more on the actual fellow that kind of changes what the focus is. And so mine was more, I kind of spread everything out and I wanted a little bit of everything. So I did patient education videos, I did resident education, I did a lot of curriculum design, I did a lot of things like that, video editing. And with John, who's our current second-year fellow, he is hugely into games. So he does these elaborate games that he's now sharing with other programs, hopefully gonna get some of them published so that we can get wider disbursement, more people using them. Whereas Sarah Paradise was on a lot of national things. So she was one of the presidents for EMRA at the time. So she did a lot more of kind of stuff on the national level, as well as how those policies affected education. So it just depends on the individual fellow, I think, but technologies definitely do change. And it's one of the other nice things about fellows is we keep up with it, but sometimes because they came from somewhere else, they know about something that we have not heard of yet. So it's a nice different perspective. Does that answer your question, Billy?
Yes, awesome, thank you.
Perfect. And Alex, I think you had one more question?
Yeah, it's just because it sounded like we were kind of wrapping up. I was just wondering if there's going to be any other type of like virtual things, because personally I wasn't able to make the earlier seminars that you had, so I didn't know if there's anything else planned in the future.
Yeah, so this is the last one that we have here. They're all available online. I can give you guys the link. Let me pull that up real quick. And then other than that, we will be at the Cal ASEP one, which I want to say is like September 25th. If you look at Cal ASEP, they're having a residency fair. We already did our SAM one. And to date, EMRA is supposed to be doing one in association with ASEP, which would be more fall. But I do not have the details yet. But we're signed up for that. I think. There's been a lot of them this year. I've had a little hard time keeping track. But our personal ones that we were running, we're done with. But let me find you that link. Any other questions?
Did you see also that Dr. Katzer has joined us?
Hey, Katzer.
Yeah, hi. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. Isabel kind of gave a general overview of Wilderness and all the opportunities and different certifications you guys offer. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Well, Isabel is awesome. She's amazing in that whole area. Let me put myself on the camera here. I'm skipping between Zoom meetings here. I do the EMS end, so I do Wilderness EMS component, search and rescue and all that stuff. So I'm happy to answer any questions about that end of the Wilderness Medicine House.
Any questions about the EMS stuff? I know someone had asked, that was more on the simulation side, but Katzer, can you talk a little bit about kind of the disaster drills and stuff that you're involved in through the hospital? Because someone had sort of touched on that with a question earlier.
So we do disaster drills. There's a disaster committee within the hospital. We do worry about, we did one for a pandemic that was supposed to be a flu pandemic last year, which allowed us to identify all of our surge areas with what type of isolation we could provide. So all that's come in handy this year, unfortunately. And then we're next to Angel Stadium, the Honda Center where the Ducks play, as well as Disneyland. And the Anaheim Convention Center, we have done mock mass shooting disaster drills, much of which involves arrival, triage, speed of triage, patient identification, movement to OR, and movement to ICU. So we've done those as well. The state does an annual disaster drill, which sometimes we piggyback on within that, so they'll have a different scenario. But that's kind of our disaster preparedness in this area. I do practice operational disaster medicine with the federal government within a DMAT team, both providing the DMAT as well as the air medical transport component. So I do have some exposure and experience in that area. I did what I refer to as the COVID air deployment in March, where we were, there weren't many COVID people in the US, but we were moving COVID positive and COVID federal quarantine people either from Asia that got flown back or off the cruise ships. And we were able to actually publish that experience on Journal of Air Medical Journal this month. So you can kind of look at that. That was an interesting, a very interesting deployment. So yeah, I do dabble in that area a little bit. I don't consider myself to be an expert, but been in a couple of tents over the years.
All right, any other questions for Katzer on the EMS component of the wilderness? All righty, thank you so much for stopping by, Katzer. Any other questions in general, guys? All right, well, thank you all so much for attending. If you guys think of anything else, my email is in the chat, and I can refer you to whichever fellowship director you need if you have a specific question to fellowships. And otherwise, thank you guys so much for joining us. And the recording for this will also be up on the website at the link that I gave you guys the YouTube channel, okay?
Bye, thanks everyone.
Have a good night, guys.